I was born near Nottingham in England, joined the British Diplomatic Service in the 1970s and worked there for 35 years. During that time I was involved with a lot of things around the world, in the Middle East, Germany, United States, with former Yugoslavia, and then finally I was British ambassador in Brazil from 2008 to 2013. Because Brazil was so good, I felt I had to leave at that point the diplomatic service. There was nothing I could do that would be better. I was at Cambridge University and I thought I'd like to do something which involved abroad, involved the world, involved politics. And I did actually start the process of applying for the diplomatic service. Then I changed my mind and instead I became a teacher. A few years later I did apply for the diplomatic service and was fortunate enough to be accepted. But there are a lot of people who apply. It's, I suppose, quite a glamorous career, or seems so from the outside. The first embassy I worked in was in Jordan, in the Middle East, in Amman, which was wonderful. I spoke Arabic and it was a fascinating place to be. And after that I went to Germany. I was in Berlin before and during the fall of the Berlin Wall. I was the deputy ambassador in Germany. After that I was deputy ambassador in the United States and then ambassador in Brazil. And in between all those times I spent my time in London in various jobs in the Foreign Office. I often say to people when they ask me what was it like in Brazil, I say when I first arrived it seemed familiar in many ways. It looked a bit like United States, a bit like Western Europe in the big cities. People speak a European language. The culture is a mixture, but there's a lot of European culture in there. But every day I found I learned more, and when I left I really felt I didn't understand the place at all. But then many Brazilians tell me that too, so perhaps that's as it should be. So this is the book. It's called Shaking My Briefcase. It's called Shaking My Briefcase because when our children were small, they used to ask me, what do you do in the embassy every day, Daddy? And of course, it's very hard to explain to a small child what diplomacy is. And our eldest son said, I know what Daddy does. He always takes his briefcase. He goes to the embassy to shake his briefcase. And so everyone in the family used to call it my work, Shaking My Briefcase. And so that's the name of the book. Some of it is humorous, some of it's funny, some of it is serious, particularly the bits about Yugoslavia, about the war there. There's some quite fairly detailed bits, but I wanted this to be something that a general reader could enjoy. As an ambassador, you travel around the country and you meet a lot of people, and I once went early in my time to Belo Horizonte. I met the mayor of Belo Horizonte and we had a meeting about various things. And at the end of the meeting, he said to me, Ambassador, I have something to ask you, which is not the usual kind of thing an ambassador does, but perhaps, I'm sure, in fact, he said, you can help us. You can be the key person for us. And he said, we have in our zoo here just outside Belo Horizonte, a gorilla. It is the only gorilla in South America, in the whole of South America. He's been there for many years, for about 30 years, came from the wild in Africa. His name is politically incorrect. It did warn me. His name is Idi Amin, because that was the time of the dictator in Uganda. But he is now getting a bit older, and we would really like to see if it would be possible to find some females who could be brought to Brazil, so that before he dies, he could reproduce. Anyhow, as it happened, it was successful. Then they did get agreement, and they sent over two females born in England, two female gorillas, and they brought a whole team of people to socialise the gorillas, because the Iji had been on his own for so long and these new females were being brought in. And I did go to see them in their in the park that they have for the gorillas in Belo Horizonte. Unfortunately, the story doesn't have a happy ending, because about 6 months later Iji died. I mean, he was already quite old and he died without having reproduced. Diplomacy comes in many different kinds, diplomacy between countries, but I'd never been involved in guerrilla diplomacy before. This was a first. Going to Berlin was the one and only time I actually asked for a particular posting and got it. And people were killed at the wall all the time. You know, and one of my jobs used to be to go and complain to the Russians when someone had been killed and to get explanations. I do have a feeling that in a small way I was involved in one of the real positive things in European history over the last decades. When I was dealing with former Yugoslavia, I was doing that from London on the policy side. But that was the toughest time of my career because you were very conscious there was a war going on, people were being killed, and the British diplomacy had a very important role at that time. I went to the Dayton Peace Conference in November 1995, we got the peace agreement, and here we are 20 years later. I'm not saying that all these people like each other, they don't. It's a cold peace, but it is a peace. Every diplomat wants to work in Washington, and for us it was a very special time during the period of Tony Blair and George Bush, very close relationship. I mean, Lula is a very special person, the only person so far to come from really nothing, from the interior of Brazil, eventually has a bit of fortune in getting an apprenticeship in a car company, becomes a trade union leader, stands 3 times and fails to be president, then is president twice. I think this is a really important thing for Brazil, because Brazil has always been, for 500 years, ever since it existed, a country of those who are governing and those who are governed, of the elite and the people down there. Whatever happens to Lula, he will still remain, I think, an absolutely key figure in Brazilian history because of coming from where he did and becoming president. One thing I liked about Brazil, and at the same time didn't like about it, was that it was very difficult to plan. People didn't like to give you commitments about something a long time in advance. And then sometimes, even if they had given you a commitment, suddenly they couldn't do it because something else had happened. But on the other hand, Brazilians are very good at improvising and doing things at short notice. It is a different way of living than you live in Britain. It's AlanCharlton32@gmail.com. Anyone is very welcome to email me, and I'll send them a book.